Jim Burke was born on September the 13th, 1920 in Houston, Texas, just over 2 years before I was born. My name is Bill Haley, and I'm a cousin of Jim Burke, and as a lawyer, I worked closely with Jim and Jim's home building business from 1949 to 1968. Like his father before him, Jim's father, E.J. Burke Sr., was a home builder, and Jim's mother's name was Mary. I knew Jim well, and I'm glad I can play a part in telling his story. I couldn't have asked for a better two people to start my career with than your grandfather and father.
Jim's father, E.J. Burke Sr., whom Jim referred to as Papa Burke, was a natural home builder, developer, and promoter. Son of D.M. Burke, Papa Burke was born in Houston's 5th Ward in 1893, dropping out of school after the 6th grade. Papa served in the Army during World War I and started building houses in 1919, shortly after the conclusion of the war. This was a period of segregated housing, and Papa developed over a dozen subdivisions for both blacks and whites in Houston. He was very proud of the new housing opportunities he brought to minorities, who were seldom given the chance of owning their own home. Papa owned and operated a lumber company and a mortgage company to focus on all aspects of the home building process. He moved from Houston to the San Antonio area in 1939, where he developed several communities, including most notably the Berkshire, Highland Hills, and Coliseum Park subdivisions. The natural Burke sporting and competitive drive was prominent in Papa's personality and manifested from developing in home building to investing in part ownership of 2 horse racing tracks and several championship quarter horses. Papa Burke lived until the age of 74, until he passed away in 1967 in Tucson, Arizona. From an early age, Jim loved individual accomplishment through competition. Jim was the first in his family to go to college, attending the University of Houston and graduating in just 3 years at the age of 19. As a senior, he was the 1939 Texas Heavyweight Amateur Wrestling Champion. Fresh out of law school and governing an island in American Samoa during World War II, Papa's son Jim was made an honorary tribesman by island elders for his contribution and service to the native people. Leaving active duty in 1946, he practiced law with Mel Hughes until Papa Burke insisted that young Jim assist in the home building business. Jim primarily built affordable FHA and VA-compliant single-family housing for veterans and for minorities in eastern and southern San Antonio.
It's such a demand for all the veterans who were returning from World War II. And the GI Bill just opened the doors for home builders to build houses that people could afford.
And then from that, he then went and operated a vertically integrated business model from his own lumber mill all the way on to some off-site production to using a lot of payroll labor rather than subcontractors.
As Jim's home building career took shape, he purchased his own lumber company in East Texas, complete with timberlands, timber rights, and sawmill operations, similar to what his father had done years before. The lumber company shipped to Jim's centralized framing plant, and the plant streamlined the accounting and construction cycle using a code system that tracked the building components as walls took shape. Jim even learned how to fly his own plane so that he could remain in close contact with the East Texas operations. Jim's constant progress towards innovation is what led to his interest in industry-leading building innovations.
I think a lot of what he did was part of what I mentioned at other times as a fully engineered business that was there. He really wasn't strictly a home builder. I mean, he bought land, he subdivided that land in a master plan, realizing that there was going to be some profits in the houses, there was going to be some profits in the shopping center, and the commercial property was there, and he really did this in a pretty planned way. He focused on value to the consumer and actually serving the middle and lower income customer. I don't think that was really by accident. I think that also had to do with planning. That's where the market was. That's also where it was the safest. And I've chosen the exact same thing with my restaurants.
From the start of his building career, Jim was heavily engaged with the country's second largest trade organization, the National Association of Home Builders. Starting in 1947, Jim was a national director of NAHB for 10 years, during which time he served on numerous NAHB committees. In 1951, he was president of the San Antonio Home Builders, a year in which membership doubled. In 1952, he was president of the Texas Association of Home Builders, also a year of rapid growth both in membership ranks and local chapters. He also served as chairman of the NAHB Building Codes Committee in that year. Jim's passion for the building industry and politics led to his election as the 22nd president of the National Association of Home Builders in 1961 at only 41 years of age. In that year, the NAHB Remodeling Services Department was started, part of the 1961 NAHB platform, More New Homes, Better Old Homes. During his NAHB presidency, Jim strongly advocated and sought new sources of money for the creation of home mortgages. He knew that if these mortgages were not readily available, affordable housing could not be built in sufficient quantity to really benefit the working middle class. He strongly favored the innovative idea of mortgage-backed securities guaranteed by fully self-supported government agencies.
We need to continue to work for the creation of a central mortgage bank. And incidentally, the first step toward the creation of a central mortgage bank was contained in the Housing Act of 1961, in that provision which authorizes for the first time the Federal National Mortgage Association to make loans on the security of government-insured or guaranteed mortgages. This is the first step in the creation of a central mortgage bank. But we must go further in order to even out the ups and downs, smooth out the flow of mortgage money, because a stable production in this industry depends, and I think you can say it depends practically in whole, on a stable and dependable flow of mortgage money into the industry.
Jim frequently proclaimed to his audiences, housing the low income, those that live in substandard housing, and those that can afford to live in a better home is not only our market, but our responsibility. Jim was outspoken about the failure of public housing and promoted the most efficient use possible of any federal subsidy that might be required. During his presidency, Jim vigorously promoted the adoption of several federal housing rules and acts which remain in effect to this day, most notably the 3% FHA down payment rule. In availing additional capital for residential mortgages that would lead directly to more home sales, Mr. Burke noticed that labor unions were buying mortgages for their pension funds, as contrasted to the general paucity of mortgages held within most pension fund portfolios.
We have continued to have meetings with managers of pension funds, and I think that practically everyone in the field of mortgage lending agrees that these pension funds are the only real new source of mortgage money.
He directed NAHB staff to send letters to over 600 home building suppliers and manufacturers who offered pensions to their employees to strongly encourage those pension funds to purchase residential mortgages, a practice that would seem obvious today. His passion for politics and assisting families translated into his active support of the Democratic Party. He was very involved with the Adlai Stevenson presidential campaigns in 1952 and 1956, the John Kennedy campaign of 1960, and heavily involved with fellow Texan Lyndon B. Johnson's campaign of 1964 and with Hubert Humphrey's campaign of 1968. As a member of the Board of Trustees of the National Housing Center, Burke was very interested in using some of the latest research developed by NAHB stemming from new building materials that some manufacturers were introducing to the home building industry. The San Antonio Home Builders Association's 1965 Parade of Homes at Burke's Pecan Valley Estates subdivision just off Burkedale Boulevard was themed The Quiet Home and received nationwide publicity as the first large-scale demonstration of residential sound conditioning in the nation. While Jim was a successful builder and committed to serving his chosen industry, friends and family knew him as a dedicated husband, father, and friend who understood that he wasn't just building houses, but homes to give people the opportunity to enjoy and thrive in. Jim met his wife Betty Jane as students at the University of Houston. They went their separate ways after graduation until the building industry brought Jim back to Houston, where he and Bea reconnected. Jim and Bea married in 1956 and brought together their two sons, Tom Vickers and John Burke, from previous marriages into one family. On February 2, 1961, their third child, E.J. Burke III, incidentally was born on the evening of Jim's inauguration as president of NAHB. Jim Burke built homes within communities which he thoroughly master planned.
Father and grandfather gave the land to the school districts to build the schools, which was a very smart and brilliant idea because the people wanted to live close to schools, churches, hospitals, shopping centers. He built apartment complexes, almost like a complete town by itself out here. They had everything, and they created land for a bank, provided land for service stations, so that in grocery stores.
Jim saw the future of integrated land development, building the Pecan Valley Golf Course in 1963 as a focal point to the Highland Hills Affordable Housing Subdivision, and became famous for the lighting that allowed the course to be played at night when daytime temperatures during the summer soared. Pecan Valley would host the 50th PGA National Championship Golf Tournament in conjunction with the 1968 World's Fair that is today viewed as San Antonio's introduction to the international stage and the largest sporting event San Antonio has ever hosted. This is even more notable in that Jim didn't begin golfing or have any connection to the golf industry until after his NAHB presidency ended. As his building career came to a close, he channeled his love for competition and achievement by focusing on motorsports. Jim co-sponsored B&B Racing, a NASCAR stock car team that featured Johnny Rutherford of Indianapolis fame and San Antonio's first national caliber stock car track. He supported San Antonian and three-time AMA National Open Class motocross champion Ken Howerton, in addition to three desert racing teams that competed in the NORA Baja 500 and Baja 1000 races. In 1978, 4 years prior to his death, Jim was inducted into the NAHB National Housing Hall of Fame for his exceptional work in the industry. And in 2013, he was inducted into the Texas Association of Builders Texas Housing Hall of Honor for his service as president in 1952.
Dad lived a brief life. He died in 1983 at just 63 years of age. The amazing thing I find about his life is this 14-year period when he did his affordable home building, and he also, during that same period, ascended from the local San Antonio chapter up to being the president of the National Association of Home Builders, which at that time was the second largest trade organization in the world. He saw affordable housing as a responsibility, not just a vocation or a business venture. Dad defined himself as someone who delivered the most value for each housing dollar his customers spent. Dad loved the affordable housing business. He took tremendous satisfaction in his participation of this essential task and in being a houser. When speaking in front of his home building friends, he seemed to always use the phrase, "the way in which we house our people." He said nothing motivated him more than imagining what it would be like if his customers did not live in a Burke home and did not live in a Burke subdivision. He and his group of employees, contractors, and material men truly affected tens of thousands of lives, even for generations. Dad adored the principle of individual homeownership. He viewed it as one of the greatest concepts ever devised by man. He thought that it led to stronger marriages and to children who would have a solid foundation for education and upward mobility. He believed that all these things only fell together when people worked together. That is why he worked so hard in conjunction with the builders associations. These organizations could consolidate best practices while at the same time present a united voice to be heard by a government that promotes safe and affordable places to live. Family and friends that really knew him believed that this highly patriotic Marine Corps captain was driven by passion as he sought to use his chosen industry, affordable housing, to build places for families of modest means to raise children and give them opportunities to enjoy and succeed in a better society.